I'm from a farm in New England. That's where I grew up. And I went to college in Colorado in a bigger town, and then I moved to Portland, which to me is a very big city. I know lots of people disagree, but I've been trying to come to terms with this city living and how overwhelming it can be at times, and kind of this sublime feeling about not really understanding a lot of the networks that we use every day, things like cell phones and internet and electronics that I personally cannot even begin to visualize, and how we're living in this world where we don't have to understand the things that we use to make our lives easier instead of making our own things, for instance. And I started out using rope and string, and it just wasn't fitting. Something wasn't right, and I had been working on a project for another separate class in Q-tips, and I picked them up again and realized they were perfect material, kind of this mass-produced, overwhelming number kind of piece that represented an individual to me that I could just multiply easily. And so it really became a material exploration. I began to dye the Q-tips first and realized as I was spreading them out on paper to dry that I could begin to make prints out of that. So this is a roll of BFK paper. So I made 3 separate pieces of the BFK rolled, and then from that I also had small pieces of thinner paper, lots and lots of those as well that came out of that. And then the Q-tips were dyed originally to make these grid patterns that I don't have in the show here, but I was constructing these very abstract shapes of a grid pattern where the Q-tips would be lashed together and multiplied so they expand. And so I had piles and piles and piles of these leftover Q-tips dyed different colors. And so this piece is not finished yet. It will be by today, hopefully.
What else are you going to do with these?
I have lots more.
But that's generally, like, those are going to stay where they are?
For the most part, yeah. It's going to more or less mirror this pathway imagery. Will be more piles. So, and I really felt like that the material and the process really helped to explain this concept I was working with, multiples and the inundation of information kind of that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Put a plastic bag on top to texture it and then peel it away when it's dry. The aesthetics are pretty ambiguous, but I mean, a lot of times when you're going through these emotions, they're pretty masked to the scene public, so I wanted the aesthetics to kind of be equally ambiguous, so the viewer can kind of interpret this as however they want. But then in the artist statement, there's a little more linkage to the actual conception behind it. Any questions?
Do you name the emotions of each one, or do you leave that?
I leave that kind of up to the viewer, or I mean, basically, I mean, there's things like despair, isolation, confusion, anger. But
they have a connection for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's emotions that like I can relate to that I try. I mean, a lot of this was just playing with a lot of different materials, and also just kind of developing an aesthetic for the entire piece, like, you know, a palette that worked together, but also kind of stood on their own. The name of the piece is Ascension, which has different meanings, but I mean, kind of to rise, and a lot of that has to do with the theme of just kind of the astronaut ascending up. But it's more of kind of like an orbit. There's also a lot of kind of planetary, like, kind of textures and themes. But yeah, I mean, you can read it like linearly, but it's also can just like one at a time, just kind of the astronaut kind of interacting with each individual environment on its own.
Did you make the figures?
Actually, I made a silicone mold of an actual toy, and then I cast it, and this is
Kathy Grudzens, and I'm a recent graduate from Merrill-Hearst University. Got a BFA in painting, and I've done this work in Fishbowl 1 at Blackfish Gallery, and the name of it is Long Arm of the Law. It's a mixed media piece of two-dimensional paintings with three-dimensional objects. It's based on childhood memories of going on weekly car trips with my parents to all parts of the Detroit area. And we were 4 kids, and my kind of bad little kids, and we'd be pinching and biting and hitting each other, and my mother invented this weapon of duct taping a fly swatter to a yardstick, and she would just absolutely flail us with it from the front seat of the car all the way to the rear view, the rear window of our family station wagon, and my dad would quietly be driving down the freeway. So I was raised in the 50s and 60s, and what first came to mind was the old-fashioned plastic and metal lunch boxes, character ones that are based either on TV shows. They're made out of wood with
This oil or acrylic?
it's acrylic paint, and the legs are fabricated out of copper tubing, and I've used paper clay on top, which I formed and sanded and then painted and glued in place. The paintings are on wood panels, and the rear view mirror, my 4 siblings and myself looking at this fly swatter coming back at us, with my dad looking at us through the rear view mirror. Long wire tube comes out of a circular painting that is of a steering wheel, and you're supposed to imagine yourself in a car and what it would be like to have this object coming back at you from your mother's hand from the front seat.
What a childhood you had. Okay, is the